I'm Dr. Alvin Thomas. My work and this show is dedicated to educating, validating, elevating, and celebrating the importance of Black fatherhood. This is the Black Fatherhood Podcast. Historically, many of the discussions about Black fatherhood in America chronicle relationships between fathers and sons. Unfortunately, because society places so much emphasis on fathers and sons, the essential bond between fathers and daughters is often marginalized. Today, we're going to look at the relationship between Black fathers and daughters through a personal and academic lens. How Black fathers are role models, how they can support their daughters' academic achievements, their role in supporting healthy social emotional development, and the impact of social policies on Black fathers. Our guest today is David Miller. He is the father of 2 daughters and 1 son and the author of Dare to be King, What If the Prince Lives, along with several other children's books. David continues to address the lack of diversity in the children's book industry by creating stories with relatable characters that promotes racial pride and contain fun storylines and rich illustrations. Books such as Khalil's Way, Gabe and His Green Thumb, Brooklyn's Finest, The Green Family Farm, Winnie, the Wizard of Wall Street, and Ida B, the Beekeeper, among many other children's book titles. He is currently working on a unique children's book project highlighting the life and legacy of Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, and it will be written in both English and Trio. He is also a PhD candidate in the School of Social Work at Morgan State University in Baltimore, where he is studying relationships between Black fathers and daughters. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I was wondering who you were talking about, man. That sounded pretty good.
Sounds good, right?
It does.
I think it's very busy.
You have a radio voice, like a kind of
That's what it is.
Very white with a Caribbean kind of flavor to it.
I like to think of it as some jazz with some soca and reggae in there.
Okay.
Thank you so much, David. So let's start with something that you wrote in a recent blog post. You say in that blog post that, like so many Black fathers who are raising daughters, I question whether I have the necessary emotional bandwidth and skills to raise a daughter in a toxic society. As fathers in a culture that dehumanizes Black girls and women, we have a moral obligation to teach our daughters strategies to navigate racism, sexism, and misogyny. That is a mouthful. There's a lot to unpack in there. Help us unpack that.
I think I have a very unique lens in terms of the way I view society, because I wear so many hats. For so many years, I provided direct services to Black fathers and young men, starting in Baltimore and then across the country. And then I really started to be intrigued as I started kind of combing over the data about Black girls and women and really looking more deeply at all of the challenges, the sexism, the racism, the misogyny. I'm good friends with a sister named Derica Wilson, who founded the Black and Missing Foundation. HBO did a series on just the alarming number of Black girls and women that go missing each year. You start looking at incarceration data and you find that the rate that Black women and girls are going to prison at astronomically alarming rates, yet nobody is talking about it. And so as a father of 2 daughters, both being a residential father when my oldest daughter was younger because the relationship with her mom didn't work out, and then being a married dad with a daughter and a son, I think it provided me with really a unique personal story of kind of seeing what it's like being a non-residential or non-custodial dad, but then also being a married dad. And on the youth side of the table, in terms of the youth work that I've been doing so long, I realized that if we are really going to create a equal playing field for young people, both boys and girls, it is so critical that we delve deeper into the father's primary role in raising children. Historically, we talk about mom's role, but we don't necessarily talk about what dad brings to the table. So, that's been both personal, professional, and then I started the PhD program because I was bored. I was literally bored, right? I don't think that's why most people start a PhD program. And again, when I started combing through the literature, was just blown away how scant the literature is on fathers raising daughters of any color, right? But then specifically black and brown dads, the literature is very, very limited. And so I decided to make that, my dissertation title. And as my grandmother would say, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, I will defend my dissertation in August, late August.
Congratulations. It is quite the feat to get this close to the finish line, and it sounds like you're pretty close to the finish line. I have never heard somebody say that I took this arduous journey because I was bored.
Right.
Man,
Yeah.
the next time you feel bored, take up soccer, take up weightlifting, learn how to make sourdough bread, learn gardening, anything.
No, I'm gonna start crocheting again. I
There
learned
you
how to
go. There
crochet
you go.
as a young boy. My grandmother taught me how to knit and crochet. So I promised my daughter that's the next thing. Since I get bored very easily,
Right.
we're gonna learn how to crochet again.
It's amazing how calming crocheting is. I remember recommending it for a couple of clients, a few male and female clients who were having issues with ADHD and just learning how to calm their mind and bring down the energy. And something as simple as crocheting, coloring. So you pull out your coloring book and you start coloring within the lines. Those simple tasks that just take the brain's energy and activity down to a level where you can manage it is just ridiculously helpful.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
beyond crocheting and using your coloring book, I know that you talk about these tips, what I like to think of as David's tips for black fathers raising daughters. I don't have a daughter myself, but I have nieces, and I have a niece who I'm extremely close to. And I think of what she's now 17. And from the time she was born up till now and beyond, I keep thinking of what she's going to face and how the world is going to see her and how the world is going to treat her at each stage. And it frightens me. I mean, the world is going to treat my black nephews differently as well. But there's something additional for a black girl that frightens me and makes me want to hold her close and makes me want to follow her everywhere and protect her and make sure nobody comes close to her. But we can't do that. But you talk about some tips for raising daughters.
Yeah, I'll mention each, and I also think
Okay.
that it's also critically important for dads to understand that this just isn't for your daughter when she's young or
Mhm.
when she's a teenager. I find, and even in some of the interviews that I've been doing for my doctoral work, that even as adult women still need to hear positive, affirming messages from their dads. That even though your daughter may be 25 or even 45 years of age as an adult, that many of the things that I share are not just for dads with young children. So the first model what healthy relationships look like. I think all too often many young women grow up not really being able to put their finger on what a healthy relationship looks like. And I think that's one of the reasons why domestic violence is often a major challenge among women, whether it's physical abuse or verbal abuse. Modeling. And that modeling is with, first and foremost, your daughter's mom, even if y'all don't like each other. Because I run into a lot of the dads that I run into, the storyline is always, well, mom is crazy and I don't like her. And my response is, well, you must have liked crazy, right? Because the two of y'all were together at some point. And so
Mhm.
even if you don't like her, you need to model an optimal level of respect, because those are the lessons that your daughter is going to draw from. give your daughter compliments about other things than just beauty. I think we
Mhm.
live in a society where I spend a lot of time monitoring and listening to hip hop. And so a lot of the music and a lot of the reality television is really focused on beauty and glamour and making money. But what else is your daughter good at? Do you like for example, I love to cook. And so my daughter's always in the kitchen with me and she makes a mean macaroni and cheese.
Mhm.
So when she makes it, I compliment her. I mean, sometimes it may be just the little things. Like I like the way we might have been in a store and the service wasn't up to par. I like the way that you kind of redirected the conversation with
Mm.
the salesperson to ensure that you receive the best services possible. So compliment our daughters about things other than beauty, because this standard of beauty, this the image that girls in this country, regardless of race, are trying to live up to, is overwhelming and oftentimes exaggerated. Teach them the power of self confidence. I really believe that when our daughters have self confidence, they can conquer any obstacle, whether it's academic, whether it's social. I think teaching them about self confidence and giving them examples of what a healthy self concept looks like and what self confidence actually means in terms of tackling difficult situations. Number four is a big one for me. Introduce them to books with girls and female heroes. So this is the book I just finished. This
Mhm.
is Ida B, the Beekeeper, and the story is dedicated to Ida B. Wells. Sadly, too many children in this country have never even heard of Ida B. Wells, regardless of coloring. So our girls need to know about a Michelle Obama, a Harriet Tubman, a Nina Simone, a Simone Biles, and a Kamala Harris, and the fact that there are just so many bold and beautiful women that have done exemplary things. You name a field, there are Black women, old and young, who have been trendsetters. We need to make sure that our daughters of all ages understand that rich legacy. And then the last one, which is a really big one for me because
Mm.
I'm a lover of music. I have very diverse musical interests, but share with them music that affirms womanhood and especially Black womanhood. I have serious concerns with a lot of the hip hop that is over sexualized, that really continues to promote promiscuity, drug abuse. And so, again, I think we need to connect our daughters to music. Like, so for example, my youngest daughter is a sophomore at North Carolina A&T. She's been listening to Miles Davis and Coltrane since she was a baby.
Mhm.
So she listens to her music, but she has an ear and an appreciation for fine music. She can listen to classical music. I don't do country. I kind of draw the line there. I'm not that's just really not. I'm sorry. I just don't. I've tried to do it, but I just can't get into country music. But of music that's affirming to the ear is really important.
You know what? I'm not going to say anything about country music. I don't want country music fans to come after me. I'm going to leave it right there. In another episode from season one, we spend the entire conversation talking about that nexus of masculinity, music, and Black culture, and what that means for Black boys, for Black girls, for Black fathers, and how it affects fatherhood and informs fatherhood. So it's really interesting to hear. I was hoping that would be one of the five, and I was very pleasantly appreciative that that was one. And I like that it was the fifth one because it's the one that you remember all the time. That primacy versus recency effect. It's the last one, so it's the last one that I remember. So thank you very much for that. You talk about this change in what music looks like for women, how the representation of Black women in music has shifted towards more promiscuity, drug use, just very denigrating almost. Well, not almost, but definitely very denigrating. I see a similar paradigm shift in Caribbean music as well. And I just wanted to put that plug in there for the Caribbean music. I hear it in rap, in American hip hop. I hear it in Jamaican reggae. I hear it in the soca and the calypso across the Caribbean. And in my own homeland of St. Lucia, the Denry segment that has just recently come out over the last few years before the pandemic has also some of those same themes in it, the denigration of women and the treatment of women as sexual objects. And so you hear fathers, you see fathers enjoying the music, and then you try to figure out what does that mean for the daughter. Then you see the daughter enjoying the music or the mom enjoying the music. What does that mean for the daughter when she's seeing those things affirmed? And what does that mean for the daughter as she's imbibing those things? What does that mean for her own sense of self, her own sense of confidence, and how she's going to navigate the world? Another place where we've seen a paradigm shift is in the way that researchers have studied Black fathers. You recently published a paper with Indiana University Press, and the paper is titled Daddy's Girl: Understanding the Impact of Black Fathers in the Social and Emotional Development of Raising Black Daughters. In that paper, you highlight and define some really important terminology, and that's non-custodial and non-residential. And towards the beginning of your presentation today, you did mention those terms again, non-custodial and non-residential. If you could spend a little bit of time telling us what those terms mean and why they are so important.
So non-residential really denotes housing situation or where a parent lives. And usually the term non-residential is used to describe, mainly in academic literature, is used to describe the fact that the parent, mainly the dad, doesn't necessarily live in the same home with the child. Non-custodial is more of a legal term to denote legal standing. And then you start getting into primary custody, joint custody. But in the academic literature, you see a lot of discussion going between non-resident and non-custodial. So my oldest daughter's 27. When I was younger, I was a non-residential dad who didn't have legal custody of my daughter. Even though I had visitation rights, I didn't have legal custody. I eventually earned joint custody, and then my daughter I ended up getting custody when she was probably a teenager. But those tend to be academic and legal terms. Like in the street, or when we're working with dads, you don't necessarily hear them use terms like non-residential or non-custodial.
I found it interesting that you used the word earned. You earned legal custody.
Yeah. It was a struggle. Now, if you talk to folks at the highest levels of child support enforcement, they tend to say that child support is a more kinder and more friendlier institution, if you will. But if you talk to just dads in community, they really struggle with the notion of child support and enforcement. And so anybody who's ever been to a child support hearing, if you're granted custody, you feel like you've earned it, because it is. And when my baby girl was younger, I was the one that initiated the fact that I don't mind paying child support, and I would, like custody. I like to be in my daughter's life, and I literally went through hell to try to be in my daughter's life. And I think that's part and parcel of the journey that many dads still go through. When you even when you go to a Department of Social Services to access any kind of support, what I'm hearing from dads across the country, I just did a study with and I know you know Kenny Braswell. We just did a study of low-income dads in Atlanta. We did a qualitative study interviewing low-income dads in Atlanta. We did the study for the Annie Casey Foundation. And over again, you hear these dads talk about their experiences when they have to go to Department of Social Services, or if they have to go to a mediation hearing, that these places that we have to show up to try to get some semblance of justice, they're not father friendly. You don't see images of dads and children on the walls. A lot of times, that first person that you engage with is rude and nasty and is condescending. That these are the experiences. And what ends up happening is, Dr. Alvin, a lot of dads They just give
Mm-hmm.
up. I mean, you constantly hear terms like deadbeat,
Mm-hmm.
right? I really believe a lot of the dad, particularly a lot of the low income dads, and the research bears this out when you look at economic numbers related to child support, a lot of the dads are just dead broke.
Mm.
They can't afford to make the child support payment. That's number one. And then number two, the toxicity. When you look at how toxic the relationship is with mom and dad, a lot of times dads are like, well, if I keep going over there, she gonna call the police. I'm gonna get arrested. I'm gonna get put into the system, and then I'm not gonna see my child. So a lot of times, dad's position is, even though I want to be in my child's life, I'm gonna take a step back, and hopefully the smoke will clear in years to come. That's not the advice that I give
Right.
dads. I tell dads, hang in there, fight tooth and nail. But a lot of dads, because we know that mom is the primary gatekeeper. And if mom is not happy, you don't get to see your child. I mean, that's what happens to so many non-residential dads and dads who do not have either primary legal custody or joint custody. The term is maternal
Right.
gatekeeping. If mom is mad, if mom doesn't like your new girlfriend, then you can't see your daughter this weekend.
So what you're saying essentially is that the idea of custodial and or the concept of the story, the narrative around custodial, non-custodial, residential, non-residential, that's a little bit more complex and nuanced than we've been thinking. You mentioned the child support system. In another area, you likened the child support system to modern day legislative slavery. And people might hear and think, that's a stretch. That's a really heavy comparison. Help us understand this comparison.
So what ends up happening to particularly and not just not just low income dads. It happens to a lot of dads who receive these astronomical child support payments, but specifically with low income dads, it literally oftentimes drives them to work underground. So, for example, in the state of Maryland, they can take up to 60% of your check.
Mhm.
Now, just let that marinate a little bit. And again, I know that children need to be taken care of. And if you're a dad and you bring a child into this world, you have to provide for your child. But if you have to give up 60% of your check, how do you live? And so what happens to a lot of dads, particularly low income dads, is it pushes them further and further into that underground economy,
Mhm.
selling drugs, working off the books, hustling, you know, oftentimes part of that criminal underworld, right? That we don't want dads to fall victim to, but oftentimes they have to do that. They end up working off the books, maybe a little job somewhere, doing some construction, making a little bit of money off the books, but they might be selling a little bit of weed, selling a little cocaine, maybe selling stolen car parts or whatever the case may be. And then what ends up happening is they get arrested and then they end up in the criminal justice system, right? So it starts with this overwhelming child support order. And then what ends up happening is you end up in a situation of incarceration. And I can think of no other institution currently in this country that more resembles modern day slavery than what is happening related to mass incarceration. So it's a cycle.
Mm.
You can't pay the child support payments, and it pushes you further and further underground. You may have arrears. You may have been locked up for 2 years, and your arrears continue. So you have the arrearage payment and the primary child support payment. You can't even make the arrears payment. And so your debt continues to add up. Now, there are a few, grassroots organizations across the country that do a great deal of work around child support modification and adjustment, but those organizations are few and far between.
So, in a previous episode, again from season one, the episode is Protector Provider Revisited. In there, we have a seasoned veteran researcher who's been looking at the child support system and the child welfare system for decades of his life. That's Ronald Mincy from Columbia School of Social Work. And he gives us a really in-depth analysis and exploration of the history, past and present, of the child support system and the child welfare system. So if anybody's listening wants a really deep understanding of that, you could go take a look at that episode. You mentioned, referenced that deadbeat stereotype quite a few times as you were talking today. But you also see that the U.S. child support system has helped to create that false deadbeat stereotype and has used that stereotype to describe Black fathers, to denigrate Black fathers. Tell us a little bit more about that nuance of that narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's when you really spend time in community, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to do a qualitative study for my dissertation versus a quantitative study. And I will eventually go back and do some quantitative work. When you really start capturing the voices of dads in communities, you begin to understand how beaten down they are, particularly by the child enforcement system. And then I was just reading some research, fairly recently, of some folks doing some focus groups with Black dads and how they begin to internalize this label as being deadbeat when they can't make the child support payment, even though they don't necessarily think they are deadbeat. But when they constantly hear this label, it becomes almost like a self-fulfilling
Mhm.
prophecy. And so I think language is critically important. And that's one of the reasons why I'm super committed, to this particular research journey, because I think that there's just so many missing stories in academia. One of the things that I was blown away, overwhelmingly, the dissertations that I've read have been about absent fathers, overwhelmingly. And I probably read 75 dissertations in the last 6 months to a year. Overwhelmingly, the dissertations are about absent fathers, fathers who can't pay child support. And so again, you even see this narrative in academic research. A lot of the research is solely looking at incarcerated dads or dads who are absent. What about looking at strength-based perspectives in the research? What about dads who want to be there, but who
Mhm.
may be struggling to pay child support, may be struggling to figure out, which I've heard a lot from dads raising daughters. Many dads that I've interviewed have said, "I wish I had a son because I would have had a kind of a built-in roadmap.
Mhm.
But for raising this little girl, I just don't know." A guy in Atlanta said to us, he prays every day that he doesn't hurt his
Ooh.
daughters because he doesn't understand girls or women.
Mhm.
So now he has this little baby girl, and he's struggling to figure out how does he raise her.
Ooh. That's heavy. But it's also really great that dads are thinking that way and are hopefully getting the help that they need. And persons like yourself and others who are doing this work with Black fathers hopefully can provide spaces where Black fathers can come with some of those questions and receive support and receive resources that will help them do the work that they've always been saying that they want to do. And in many cases, are already doing. How can we help them do it even better? We know that there's some responsible fatherhood programs and other types of fatherhood programs that exist to provide that kind of space and support for Black fathers. But thank you so much again, David Miller, for being with us today, for sharing your work, sharing your passion. Hopefully, not hopefully, but we will hear about your defense in August. And the next time I hear from you and talk with you, we will be talking with Dr. David Miller and listening to his new book related to the life of the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah. Thank you very much, David, for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you again, David, for joining us. And this was just such a really rich, challenging conversation to have. David does a ton of work on how fathers of daughters engage that work. And it's qualitatively different from how fathers of sons and black sons specifically engage this work. But David's suggestions, David's feedback, I think rings true not just for black fathers raising daughters, but probably for everybody. There are things that are necessary for us to consider for all individuals. David's 5 tips set a really good stage for how we can support black families, how we can support black boys, how we can support black children, how we can support children in general. Everyone benefits from affirming messages. Black daughters need dads to embrace them. Black sons need it as well, but in this case, black daughters need dads to embrace them. And black dads also need support in trying to figure out how to do that embracing, not just for their sons, but also for their daughters. It may come a little bit more naturally for some than for others, but find the support to be able to do that work. David gave us 5 specific tips that I think are useful for raising daughters, but might be useful as you adapt them to your own life, whether you're raising kids, or you're just with another person, or you're with yourself. Applying those tips you might find these very useful to helping you live a more fulfilling life. David says, model what healthy relationships look like, both for yourself and for your kids and others that you might be connected to. Give them compliments about other things than just beauty. Give yourself compliments as well. Teach them the power of self-confidence. Teach yourself the power of confidence in your own strength and your own abilities. Introduce them to books with black girls or women as heroes. And share music that affirms womanhood, particularly black womanhood. Share music that affirms the life, affirms the value of others and of yourself. And in doing so, you will find that you would have helped to create a better human being, a stronger human being. You'd have created a better society, a better community, a better world where we all can support each other. Thank you again for listening. You've been listening to the Black Fatherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alvin Thomas. I'm a clinical psychologist, researcher, and the director of the TriLab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's School of Human Ecology. Original music for our series was composed and performed by Micaiah De Silva. Our series producer is Jill Ruby. The podcast is supported by the School of Human Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And you can follow me on Twitter at Dr_AT758. That's Dr_AT758. And on the web at thomaslab.humanecology.wisc.edu. Make sure to subscribe to the Black Fatherhood Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.